members of the Chinese government are actually saying that the growth rates may be 6 to 6.5%, that's the range, by the end of this year. Now, earlier I spoke to Yukon Huang, a senior associate at the Carnegie Asia Program, and I asked him if this pullback in growth might be a good thing.
Well, I think that the policymakers are more concerned about reform, longer-term sustainability issues. They're less concerned about what happens this year and next. They realize that the economy's got to slow down. There's still excess inventories. There's excess capacity in the economy. Remember, they're coming from growth rates of 9 to 10% just a few years ago. So it's basically got to taper off. Now, whether that tapering off occurs at 7%, 7.5%, or as the Minister is hinting at, Minister of Finance is hinting at, it may even fall below 7%. And they're pretty relaxed about this. But markets are actually very concerned.
Why, I mean, this is a very simplistic question, but why do investors care so much, whether it's at 6.5 or 7 or 7.5?
Well, China's such a big economy. Its growth rate, if it's 8% versus whether it's 7%, has a significant impact on commodity markets, demand for copper, ore, minerals, energy. Countries like Australia, the Middle East, Latin America, they export a lot of raw materials to China. Their prices and their export earnings have been declining. Countries in East Asia, who together with China produce manufactured goods for the West, are also concerned that their growth rates will slow down because their manufacturing of parts and components for China will slow down. So in some ways, the world has become more dependent on China. And this is a big issue because now it's the second largest economy. So 1% means a lot for global demand, but it doesn't necessarily mean as much as I would say for China itself.
There are many countries around the world who used to be in near double-digit growth rates for as long as a decade, Japan, Korea, and so on. And we talked about this earlier, that the growth rate, as you get bigger and bigger, it starts to come down. So whether it's 7 or 6%, is this a normal phenomenon?
Well, if you look at the so-called success stories of the past, the Koreas and the Taiwans, Japans in the world, they grew at double digit for several decades. Then just about at this income level, the same income level that China is currently at, they started to gravitate toward 8%. So it's natural. It's a natural progression. And the next step is it goes to 5 or 6%. So China 2020, China 2030, we're going to talk about growth rates of 6 or 5%, and that'll be fairly normal. The question, however, everyone's been used to double digit. So it's very hard for people to get accepted to the fact that growth of 7 or 7.5% is okay. China's becoming a more normal economy.
The Chinese government has gone on record saying that they want to bring down the growth rate to reduce sort of the credit that's available in the private sector. So they've successfully done that. Housing prices perhaps is a different issue. But at this point, does the government need to step in, or should the government let sort of this natural slowdown occur on its own?
I think the government is essentially becoming hands-off on the growth rate. It is very active in trying to curtail credit expansion, monetary expansion. There's been an excess buildup of debt over the last 3 to 4 years, and they are concerned about that. They realize that if they control the credit expansion, this will probably have a moderating effect upon growth. And that's why they're saying that if growth goes down a little bit more, they're not too worried about it. They're more concerned about the debt problem in China.
I don't want to get too technical about this. I just want to ask you one last question. You've got the inflation in China running at 3 and 4%. You have wages growing at 10 to 12%. So the average person in China, in the big cities, if you will, they're making on average 8% more every year. Is it fair to say that even with the growth rate at 6.5%, that the quality of life will improve for the average working Chinese citizen?
If they get their policies right, for example, this big urbanization strategy that the premier is trying to develop, if they get it right, I think the standard of living and wages will continue to increase for the rest of this decade at least. And part of the reason, of course, is the labor force is shrinking. There aren't as many people out there. So you actually see wages going up still, even though the growth of the economy is moderating.